Hello, Pack. The Alpha King's werewolf had not let anyone touch it in 11 years. Not the handlers who fed it, not the healers who stitched its wounds after border raids, not the king himself on the nights the beast came back from a fight with blood matted into its coat and a look in its pale eyes that said it had done what was necessary and required nothing in return. Then a healer arrived at Ironhold with a bone-handled medical kit that had belonged to her father, and the werewolf walked past 3 handlers and a closed gate to lie a dying pup at her feet. She had the pup breathing in minutes. The king arrived an hour later. Neither of them knew yet what that meant. Let's begin. Marin had not planned to stay at Ironhold. She had planned to pass through it. The Stormlands Pass was 3 days north, and the Pack settlement at Oakspire had sent word that one of their elders had a chest infection that wasn't responding to the usual treatments. Marin had the compound for it, a specific preparation of dried lungwort and pine resin that most healers didn't bother to learn because it required 2 days of careful extraction. And she had been on the road since before dawn, her cart loaded with her father's medical kit and 3 weeks of supplies, the horse moving at the patient pace of an animal that had learned not to expect hurry from its owner. She stopped at Ironhold because the wheel needed repinning. That was all. A loose iron pin in the left rear axle, the kind of thing that took a blacksmith 20 minutes and cost 2 copper pieces. And there was a smithy just inside the outer gate of the Ironhold settlement, visible from the road. She had not been inside the gates for 10 minutes when she heard the sound. It came from the direction of the main courtyard, not quite a howl, not quite a bark, but something lower and more urgent, the kind of sound an animal makes when it is doing something it has never done before and is not certain it is doing correctly. Marin set down the wheel pin she had been handing to the smith and turned. The werewolf was enormous. She had heard of it, the way travelers heard of things they hoped to never encounter directly. The Alpha King of Ironhold kept a werewolf, bonded to him from a pup, that had fought in the border raids against the northern reaches and come back from each one. It was not a pet. The people who mentioned it were careful to say that. It was not a pet, and it did not behave like one, and the last man who had tried to approach it without permission had lost 2 fingers for the attempt. It was standing in the courtyard with a small body in its mouth, not gripped, carried, the way a mother wolf carries a pup that has wandered too close to danger. Carefully, with its head lowered and its gait deliberate, picking its way across the cobblestones with the focused attention of something that understood the weight of what it was carrying. The pup was small, maybe 6 weeks old, gray-brown, limp, with a dark stain spreading from somewhere behind its left shoulder. The werewolf walked directly to Moraine and set the pup at her feet. Then it sat back on its haunches and looked at her with those pale eyes, and the entire courtyard went quiet. Marin looked down at the pup. She looked at the werewolf. She crouched. "All right," she said. "Let me see." She worked on the cobblestones because there was no time to move the pup, and she was not going to ask the werewolf to carry it again. Someone brought her a blanket without being asked. She registered the presence of hands setting it beside her without looking up, and she spread it under the pup and opened her father's kit. The wound was a puncture, deep and angled, the kind that happened when a small body encountered something sharp at speed. A fence post, maybe, or a piece of broken iron in the outer field. The pup had lost blood, but not as much as the matted fur suggested. The real problem was the shallow, stuttering quality of its breathing. Something in the chest cavity was compressed, and if she didn't address it in the next few minutes, the breathing would stop. She had done this before. Not often, but enough. She worked quickly and without speaking. The werewolf did not move. It sat at the edge of the blanket and watched her with the patient, absolute attention of something that had made a decision and was not going to second-guess it. Once, when her hand moved too quickly near the pup's face, it shifted its weight slightly. Not threatening, just present, just reminding her that it was there. She acknowledged this without looking at it. "I know," she said. "I'm being careful." It settled. The courtyard had not emptied. She was aware of that in the peripheral way she was aware of most things when she was working. The presence of bodies, the quality of the silence, the fact that the silence was the particular kind that meant people were watching something they did not entirely understand and had decided not to interrupt. She filed it away and kept working. The pup's breathing steadied after 7 minutes. Not strong, not yet, but even. The compressed space in its chest had released, the wound was packed and bound, and when Marin sat back on her heels and exhaled, the small gray-brown body lifted and fell with the reliable rhythm of something that intended to keep living. The war wolf leaned forward and touched its nose to the pup's head. Then it looked at Marin. She met its gaze. Pale eyes, ancient and specific, the kind of eyes that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by most of it. But there was something in them now. Not surprise, exactly. Something quieter than that. Something that looked, disconcertingly, like recognition. She heard footsteps behind her, not running, measured, deliberate, the footsteps of someone who had been moving quickly and had slowed down before entering the courtyard because they did not want to be seen moving quickly. She did not turn around. "It's stable," she said. "It needs rest and warmth and something for the pain. I have a preparation in my kit. I'll leave instructions." A pause. "How long have you been here?" The voice was low and even, the kind of voice that was accustomed to being the last word in any room. "About 20 minutes, Marin said. She was still looking at the pup. "I stopped to have a wheel pin replaced." Another pause, longer this time. "My wolf brought you the pup." "Yes." "He has never done that before." "I gathered." She finally stood, turning to face him. "You're the Alpha King." He was standing at the edge of the courtyard, still in riding gear, dust on his boots, and a quality of coiled stillness about him that she associated with men who had learned to keep everything very controlled because the alternative was something they didn't want to examine. He was looking at her with an expression that was careful in the way that careful expressions are when they are working very hard to stay that way. "Caelum," he said. "Marin." She began cleaning her hands on the cloth from her kit. "I'm a traveling healer. I was passing through." His gaze moved to his wolf, which had not moved from its position beside the pup. Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. "I see," he said. He did not sound like a man who saw exactly. He sounded like a man who was looking at something he had not been prepared to look at and was taking his time deciding what to do about it. They moved the pup to a room off the main hall. A warm room with a low fire and a stone floor that held heat. The werewolf followed without being asked and settled in the corner nearest the pup's blanket, where it remained for the rest of the afternoon in the particular stillness of something that has finished one task and is waiting to see if another will be required. Marin stayed because the pup needed monitoring through the first few hours, and because her wheel pin would not be ready until the following morning, and because the Alpha King had asked her, in the same flat, final tone he seemed to use for everything, if she would stay the night. She had said yes before she thought about it. She noticed that, filed it away. A steward showed her to a room in the east wing, plain and clean, with a window that looked out over the outer courtyard. She washed the road dust off her hands and face and went back to check on the pup, and found that the king had not left the small room either. He was sitting in a chair near the fire, not looking at the pup, not looking at her when she came in. He was looking at his wolf, with an expression she couldn't quite read, the kind of expression that might have been confusion or might have been the beginning of something a person wasn't ready to name yet. "He's never done anything like that," he said. He wasn't speaking to her, exactly, more like speaking to the room. Brought a pup to a healer? Brought anything to anyone. He paused. He doesn't ask for help. Marin looked at the werewolf, which looked back at her with those pale, ancient eyes. He wasn't asking for himself. The king was quiet for a moment. No, he said finally. He wasn't. She checked the pup's breathing, adjusted the bandaging, and left a small clay pot of the pain preparation with instructions written on a strip of cloth. She was at the door when he spoke again. You said you were passing through. I was. To Oak Spire? She turned. He was still looking at the fire. Yes. The pass is closed until the day after tomorrow. Ice storm came through last night. The road won't be safe until it's cleared. He said it without inflection, the way he seemed to say everything. You're welcome to remain. She looked at him for a moment. He did not look back. Thank you, she said. She went to her room and lay down on the plain bed and listened to the sounds of the fortress settling around her and tried to understand why the air in this place felt different from other places she had passed through, thicker somehow, more present. She was asleep before she found an answer. On the second day, the pup was stronger. It lifted its head when Marin came in and made a sound that was not quite a whimper and not quite a greeting, but somewhere between the two. The werewolf, still in its corner, watched her cross the room with the same unbroken attention it had given her since the courtyard. She cleaned and redressed the wound. The king was not there. He was there in the afternoon when she came back to check again. He was sitting in the same chair, and this time he was watching her work with an expression that was entirely neutral and entirely focused. The kind of attention a person gives to something they are trying to understand by observation, because asking directly feels like too large a concession. Where did you train? He asked. My father. Then a healer in the Crowlands for 2 years. Then I traveled. She didn't look up from the bandaging. Your wolf's coat needs attention. There's something matted behind his left ear. Looks like it's been there for a while. I can look at it if he'll let me. A pause. He won't let the handlers near his head. I know. I'm asking if he'll let me. Another pause. She finished with the pup and turned to look at the werewolf, which was already watching her. She held its gaze for a moment, then moved slowly to where it sat and crouched beside it. All right, she said quietly. I'm going to touch your ear. Tell me if you want me to stop. She was aware that she was talking to a wolf as if it would answer her. She was also aware that the king behind her had gone very still. The werewolf did not move when she touched the matted fur behind its ear. It sat with the patient, absolute quality it brought to everything, and let her work the knot loose. And when she found the small embedded thorn beneath it and extracted it with steady fingers, the beast exhaled, a long, slow breath that moved through its entire body. She sat back. There. The werewolf turned its head and pressed its nose briefly to her palm. She heard the king's chair move. She did not turn around. Takikan, that evening, the steward, a compact, gray-haired woman named Petra, who moved through the fortress with the authority of someone who had been managing it considerably longer than the current king, found Marin in the East Wing corridor and invited her to the hall for supper. The king takes his meals with the senior staff, Petra said. You're welcome to join. I'm not senior staff. No, but he asked. Petra said it in the tone of someone delivering information without editorial, which was itself a kind of editorial. The hall was long and stone-flagged, lit by iron chandeliers and a fire at the far end that had clearly been burning for years. The king was already at the table with 4 others. 2 men who had the look of senior soldiers, a woman Marin recognized as the pack's head archivist by the ink stains on her fingers, and an older man with a council member's chain who introduced himself as Elder Vorn and looked at Marin with the particular careful attention of someone cataloging her for later use. Supper was quiet and practical. The conversation moved through border patrol schedules, a dispute about grazing rights in the southern field, and the condition of the Stormlands Road. Marin ate and listened, and did not offer opinions on things she knew nothing about. The king, she noticed, ate almost nothing. He sat at the head of the table and moved food around his plate and occasionally answered a direct question with the flat, final economy she was beginning to recognize as his particular register. He did not look at her often. When he did, he looked away quickly. Not evasively, but with the deliberateness of a man exercising a decision he had made in advance. She filed that away too. After supper, Elder Vorn walked with her back toward the east wing, which was not quite on his way to anywhere she could identify. "You're a traveling healer," he said. "Yes. Passing through. The road is closed until tomorrow." "So it is." He paused at the junction of two corridors, hands folded behind his back. "The king's wolf has not taken to anyone in 11 years, not since the king's mate." He stopped. Reconsidered. "Not in a very long time." Marin looked at him steadily. "What happened to his mate?" Vorn's expression did not change. "That's a question for the king." He inclined his head. "Good evening, healer." He walked away, and Marin stood in the corridor for a moment, listening to the fortress settle around her, and thought about pale eyes that held recognition, and a man who moved food around a plate and looked away on purpose. On the third morning, the pup stood up. It was brief, 4 or 5 seconds of wobbling, determined verticality before it sat back down with an expression of profound surprise at its own legs. But it stood, and Marin laughed, a short, genuine sound that echoed in the small, warm room, and the werewolf made a sound she had not heard from it before. Low and resonant. Not quite a howl, the king appeared in the doorway. He had clearly been in the corridor already, which meant he had been coming to check and had heard her laugh and had paused before entering. She could tell by the quality of his stillness, not the stillness of a rival, but the stillness of someone who had stopped moving and was deciding whether to start again. "He stood," she said. The king's gaze moved from her to the pup to his wolf, and something in his face changed in the way that faces change when something has been held very tightly for a very long time and a single moment of unexpected warmth finds the edge of it. "Good," he said. It was a flat word, but it wasn't flat in the way his flat words usually were. It was flat in the way that a word is flat when the feeling behind it is too large for any other shape. She looked at him. He looked at the pup. "I'll be able to leave today," she said. "The road should be clear." "It is." A pause. "I had someone check at first light." She waited. "There's no need to rush," he said. He said it to the pup. "The pup should be monitored for another day or 2. The wound could reopen if he moves too much." "He's going to move too much. He's a pup." "Yes." The ghost of something crossed his face. Not quite a smile. Close enough. "I suppose he is." She stayed. She was not sure later, exactly when she stopped thinking of it as staying because the pup needed monitoring and started thinking of it as something else. The days had a rhythm to them. Morning checks on the pup, afternoons that seemed to arrange themselves so that she and the king were in the same spaces without either of them having explicitly planned it. Evenings in the hall where she was learning the names of the senior staff and the particular shape of Ironhold's daily life. The werewolf was always nearby, not always visible, but nearby. She had learned to sense it, the particular quality of attention that meant it was watching from somewhere she hadn't located yet. It had taken to following her through the fortress in the mornings, a few paces behind, silent and enormous. And the first time it had happened, a young soldier had pressed himself flat against the corridor wall and stared at her with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. She had asked Petra about it later. The wolf hasn't followed anyone but the king in 11 years, Petra said, in the tone of someone stating a fact they have already made their peace with. He follows me because I'm treating the pup. Petra looked at her with the patient expression of someone who has been managing a household for a long time and has learned that some things explain themselves eventually. If you say so. On the 4th evening, she found herself in the corridor outside the small warm room at the same time as the king, both of them apparently having come to check on the pup at the same hour without coordinating it. They stood in the doorway together and watched the pup sleep. Genuinely sleep now. The deep, even breathing of something that had decided it was going to live, and the war wolf in its corner, and the low fire. What happened to his mate? She asked. She had not planned to ask it then. But the corridor was quiet, and the question had been sitting in her since Elder Vorn had not answered it, and the king was standing close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, and it seemed like the kind of question that belonged to this particular quality of quiet. He was silent for a long moment. She left, he said. 3 years ago, before the ceremony. She crossed into the Vale territory and sent a message from there. He paused. She said the bond wasn't what she had been told it would be, that she didn't feel what she was supposed to feel. Another pause. I don't know if that was true. I never asked. Why not? Because the answer didn't change anything. He looked at the fire. She was gone. The bond. He stopped, started again. An unnamed bond decays. Without the ceremony, without naming it publicly, it thins. Over time, it becomes... He seemed to be choosing words with the care of someone picking up something fragile. It becomes a scar, something that was there, not something that is. Marin was quiet for a moment. And since then? Since then, I have run this territory and managed the council and done what needed to be done. He said it without bitterness, which was almost worse. My wolf stopped eating for 2 weeks after she left. He recovered. He has not... He paused again. He has not shown interest in anyone since. She looked at the werewolf. It was looking at her. Until me, she said. Until you. The fire snapped. The pup shifted in its sleep. I'm a traveling healer passing through, she said. I'm not... She stopped. I don't know what he thinks he's found. No. The king's voice was very quiet. Neither do I. But he didn't sound like a man who didn't know. He sounded like a man who knew and was not yet ready to say it, which was a different thing entirely. On the 5th day, Elder Vorn came to find her. He found her in the East Wing corridor, which she was beginning to think of as hers, in the way you think of a space as yours when you have walked it enough times to know where the stones are uneven. He had 2 other council members with him, and he had the smooth, careful expression of someone who had prepared what they were going to say. We need to speak with you about the matter of the king's wolf, he said. She waited. The wolf's behavior is... He chose the word carefully. Irregular. The pack has noticed. There are questions about what it signifies. It signifies that I treated a pup, and the wolf is accustomed to me now. The wolf does not become accustomed to people, said the council member to Vorn's left, a woman with a silver chain and a voice like carefully sanded wood. He has been the king's werewolf for 11 years. His behavior is a matter of pack significance. We cannot have the pack interpreting it as what? Marin said. A pause. As a bond recognition, Vorn said, with the precision of a man who had been a council elder for long enough to know that some things had to be said plainly, even when you would prefer to keep them vague. Marin looked at him steadily. I'm a traveling healer. I have no pack affiliation. I have no standing here. I treated a pup, and I've been monitoring its recovery. Yes. Vorn's expression was not unkind, exactly. It was the expression of a man doing something he considered necessary. We're aware of that, which is why we think it would be best for the pack and for the king if you completed your treatment and returned to the road, before the wolf's behavior is interpreted in ways that would complicate the king's position. And the king's position is complicated by his wolf choosing to follow a healer. The king's position is complicated by the possibility of a bond that was not sanctioned by this council. The woman with the silver chain said it with the careful enunciation of someone making sure they are not misunderstood. We have responsibilities to this territory. The king's bond is not a private matter. Marin was quiet for a moment. "I'll speak to the king," she said. "We have already spoken to the king," Vorn said. "Then I'll speak to him again." She walked away from them down the corridor and did not look back, and kept her pace entirely even, and found the king in the great hall standing at the window that looked out over the outer courtyard, exactly where she had somehow known he would be. "Your council came to see me," she said. "I know." He didn't turn from the window. "I told them I would handle it." "They don't seem to feel you've handled it." "No." A pause. "They're concerned about the wolf. They're concerned about what the wolf means." She came to stand beside him, not quite at the window, looking at the side of his face. "Are they wrong to be?" He was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the courtyard was ordinary. Handlers moving through their routines, the sound of horses in the distant stable, the particular gray light of a Stormlands afternoon. "No," he said, "they're not wrong." She waited. "The wolf knows things before I do," he said, with the quality of a man saying something he has been thinking for several days and has finally decided to say aloud. He has always been that way. He knew the border raid was coming 2 days before the scouts reported it. He knew my mate was going to leave. He stopped. He stopped eating a week before she told me. I didn't understand it at the time. And now? He turned from the window. He looked at her with the full weight of his attention, which was, she was discovering, a considerable thing. The kind of attention that had been carefully rationed for a long time and did not give itself often. "Now I think he knows something I haven't let myself look at," he said. "And I think the council is right that it will complicate things. And I think—" He paused. "I think you should know that before you decide whether to stay or go." She held his gaze. "What does it complicate?" "Everything." He said it without drama. "A bond requires ceremony. Ceremony requires council approval. The council will not approve a bond with an unaffiliated healer who arrived on a cart with a loose wheel pin and has no standing in this territory." He paused. "They will find reasons. They will make it procedurally impossible. They will be very polite about it." "And you?" Something shifted in his expression. Not much, just a fraction. "I am the Alpha King of Ironhold," he said. "I have run this territory for 9 years, and I have done what the council required, and I have not—" He stopped, started again, more carefully. "I have not let myself want something the council would find inconvenient, not since—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. She looked at him for a long moment. "Your wolf brought me a dying pup," she said. "He didn't ask the council first." The ghost of something crossed his face again, the same almost smile she had seen in the small warm room, but closer to the surface this time, less controlled. "No," he said, "he didn't." The council convened formally the following morning. Marin was not invited, which told her everything she needed to know about how the council intended to handle it. She spent the morning with the pup, who was walking properly now, still tentative, still testing the leg that had been closest to the wound, but walking, navigating the warm room with the earnest determination of something that had decided the world was worth investigating. The werewolf watched from its corner with what she had come to recognize as satisfaction. "You started all of this," she told it. It looked at her with those pale, ancient eyes and did not appear troubled by the accusation. She heard the council session end from 2 corridors away. Not the words, but the particular quality of sound that meant a formal proceeding had concluded. She heard footsteps, multiple sets, moving toward the east wing. She stayed where she was. Petra came first, which Marin had not expected. The steward appeared in the doorway of the warm room and looked at her with the expression of someone who has been managing a household through many things and has decided that this particular thing falls within her scope. "The council has issued a formal recommendation," Petra said, "that you be thanked for your service to the pack and provided with supplies for your journey and escorted to the Stormlands Road." "I see." "The king has not agreed to the recommendation." Marin looked up. "He is in the Great Hall," Petra said. "He asked me to tell you." She found him there, standing at the long table rather than sitting, which she had learned meant something was not resolved. The council members were arranged along one side with the careful expressions of people who had made a procedurally correct argument and were waiting for it to be acknowledged. Elder Vorn stood at the center with his hands folded and his face entirely neutral. The king was looking at her when she came in. "The council has made a recommendation," he said. "Petra told me. I have not accepted it." He said it to her, not to the council, which she noted. "I told the council that the wolf's behavior is not a matter for procedural management, that what my wolf chooses is not subject to council approval. The king's bond is absolutely subject to council," the woman with the silver chain began. "My wolf's choices are not my bond," the king said. "Not yet." He paused. "But I intend them to be." The room went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when something that has been building for several days is finally said aloud. Marin looked at him. He looked at her. "You should have a say in this," he said. "I'm aware that I am telling you something in a room full of people who have an opinion about it, and that is not—" He paused. "That is not how I wanted to do this." "How did you want to do it?" "Privately, without an audience." Something moved in his expression. Not the almost smile, something more direct than that. "But the council has made it clear they intend to move quickly, and I am not willing to let them move quickly on your behalf without you present." She looked at the council. Vorn's expression had shifted slightly, not hostile, but recalibrating, the expression of a man who had expected a different kind of king in this moment. She looked back at Caelum. "What does naming it require?" she asked. "Your consent," he said, "and a ceremony. And—" he glanced at the council. "Council witnesses, by law, though the law does not specify that the council must approve, only that they must witness." A sharp intake of breath from the woman with the silver chain. "That is a very narrow reading of the statute," Vorn said. "It is the accurate reading," the king said. "I had the archivist verify it this morning." Marin was quiet for a moment. The pup was in the warm room 2 corridors away, walking on its own legs. The werewolf was there too, watching it with satisfaction. She thought about pale eyes that had looked at her across a courtyard and made a decision that 11 years of discipline had not made, and about a man who had moved food around a plate and looked away on purpose and said, "I have not let myself want something the council would find inconvenient," with the flat, final voice of someone who had been practicing that sentence for a long time. "I have a question," she said. "Ask it." "When did you know?" She held his gaze. "Not the wolf. You." He was still for a moment. The council members were very quiet. "When you didn't turn around," he said. "In the courtyard, when I came in. You said it's stable before you knew who was there. You were working, and the pup was what mattered, and you didn't stop to manage how you appeared." He paused. "I have been in this territory for 9 years, and I cannot remember the last time someone was in a room with me and was not managing how they appeared. She held his gaze for a long moment. The wolf was earlier, she said. The wolf was much earlier. Something in his face settled, the stillness of something that had finally stopped bracing. He knew in the courtyard. I knew in the corridor when you laughed. She thought about the small warm room and the pup standing on wobbling legs and the laugh she hadn't planned. "All right," she said. The ceremony was not elaborate. It was held in the Great Hall 3 days later because 3 days was the minimum notice required by pack law, and the king had not been willing to wait longer than the minimum. The hall was full. The senior staff, the council, the soldiers who had been in the courtyard on the first day, the young soldier who had pressed himself against the wall in the corridor, Petra standing near the door with the expression of someone who had been expecting this for longer than she would say. The war wolf was there. It stood at the king's left side, not behind him, not at a distance. Beside him, the way it stood in battle, and it watched the proceedings with those pale eyes that held everything. The pup was there too, carried in by one of the younger handlers, and it sat in the middle of the hall floor and looked around at everything with the bright, interested attention of something that has recently discovered it is going to live, and finds the world accordingly fascinating. The ceremony was old pack law, older than the council's current procedural statutes, older than the Ironhold fortress itself, the kind of ceremony that had been performed before there were councils to witness it. 2 people, a named bond, witnesses. Caelum spoke the words first, in the flat, careful voice that she had learned was not flatness but precision, every word picked up and examined before being set down. "I name this bond," he said, "before this pack and before my wolf and before whatever comes after this. I name it without qualification and without condition. I name it as what it is." He looked at her. She had thought about what she would say. She had thought about it for 3 days and had arrived at something that was not elegant but was accurate. "I came here for a wheel pin," she said. Someone in the hall made a sound that might have been a laugh, quickly suppressed. "I'm staying for this," she said. "I name the bond. I name it as mine. I'm not naming it because your wolf chose me, though I'm grateful he did." She looked at the war wolf briefly, then back at the king. "I'm naming it because you told a room full of people you intended it to be, and you asked me first." The hall was very quiet. Caelum looked at her with the full weight of that careful, rationed attention, and something in it was different now. Not rationed anymore. Present. All of it present. "Witnessed," said Elder Vorn, in the voice of a man who has lost an argument gracefully and intends to be remembered for the grace. The pack witnessed. The war wolf made the low, resonant sound she had heard once before in the small, warm room, when the pup had stood for the first time. Not quite a howl. Something older than a howl. Something that meant, in whatever language it spoke, yes, this. Finally! Later, much later, when the hall had emptied and the fire had burned down to coals and the pup had been carried off to sleep by the handler, and only the 3 of them remained, the king and Marine and the war wolf, she sat on the stone floor beside the beast and let it rest its enormous head in her lap and looked at Caelum across the low fire. "He's going to need a name," she said. "The pup." "He has a name." Caelum was sitting with his back against the wall, the most relaxed she had seen him. Not loose, exactly, but no longer braced. "The handlers have been calling him Axel." She looked at him. "Because of the wheel pin," he said, with the ghost of the almost smile, which was becoming, she was discovering, more frequent and less ghost-like. "That is a terrible name. It suits him." He looked at the werewolf, whose eyes were half closed in the particular way of something that is not sleeping but has decided that nothing requires its attention at this moment. He's going to be enormous. You can tell by the paws. Your wolf's pups always run large? This one isn't. He paused. The pup isn't his. He found him in the outer field. Orphaned, we think. He's been. He stopped again. She looked at him. He's been what? He's been checking on him every morning since you left the first set of instructions. Before I come to check, he goes first. Caelum looked at the fire. I didn't tell you that. She stroked the werewolf's ears, and the beast exhaled that long, slow breath again, the one that moved through its whole body. Why not? Because I didn't know what it meant, and I didn't want to say something that turned out to be wrong. He looked at her. I have been wrong before, about bonds, about what they mean. I didn't want to. He paused. I didn't want to tell you something that cost you something and then have it not be what I said it was. She held his gaze across the fire. It's what you said it was, she said. He was quiet for a moment. Yes, he said, I know. The werewolf's breathing had gone deep and even. Not the alert stillness of guard duty, the genuine, unguarded breathing of something that had finished what it set out to do and had no further concerns. He's asleep, she said. Caelum looked. Something moved in his face. Not the almost smile, something fuller than that, something she suspected he had not shown a room in a very long time. He hasn't slept like that in years, he said quietly. Not since before. He stopped. Not in a long time. She looked at the beast's great head in her lap, the pale eyes closed, the scarred coat rising and falling with the slow rhythm of something at rest. He knew, she said. He always knows. Caelum looked at her. He knew before I was willing to. He's been waiting for me to catch up. And have you? He looked at her steadily, with the full presence of someone who has stopped rationing. Yes, he said, I think I finally have. The fire cracked and settled. Outside, the stormland's wind moved through the courtyard, and the fortress held against it the way it had held against everything, stone and iron, and the particular stubbornness of something built to last. The werewolf slept. The pup slept 2 corridors away, with a name that was terrible and would probably stick. Marin sat with a beast's head in her lap and looked at a king who had spent 3 years not letting himself want anything inconvenient, and thought about wheel pins and dying pups and pale eyes that had looked at her across a courtyard and simply decided. She had not planned to stay at Ironhold. She was going to stay at Ironhold. Pack, I want to ask you something. The werewolf knew before anyone. He walked past 3 handlers and a closed gate and laid a dying pup at a stranger's feet, and he did it with the absolute certainty of something that doesn't second-guess itself. The king took longer. He's a man who picks up every word and examines it before he sets it down, and he had been wrong before, and being wrong had cost him something he was still carrying. But here's what I keep thinking about. She asked him, when did you know? And he said, when you didn't turn around. Not when the wolf chose her. Not when the pup lived. When she was working and the pup was what mattered and she wasn't managing how she appeared. Sometimes the thing that breaks through 11 years of careful control is just someone being entirely themselves in a room. Tell me in the comments. Was the wolf right before the king was? Or did they know at the same moment and only one of them was willing to admit it? And if you know someone who needs a slow burn story about a werewolf with better instincts than his king, share this with them. That's the best gift you can give this channel. I'll see you in the next one.